Welcome to Season 3 of The Spiritually Curious Therapist, the podcast for mental health professionals, healers, and seekers who believe that true healing happens at the intersection of psychotherapy, nervous system science, and holistic body-centered wisdom. I'm your host, Jody Silverman, licensed therapist, Reiki master and teacher, and all-around consciousness guide. I'm here to explore how we integrate the clinical with the intuitive, the evidence-based with the energetic, and the psychological with the soulful. Each week, we will dive into practices, frameworks, and conversations that support deep healing, both for ourselves and the people we serve. And just a quick note, while I'm a licensed therapist, this podcast is for educational and inspirational purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy. So let's get curious about the body, the nervous system, the heart, and the wisdom that lives within it all. Hi, and welcome back to the Spiritually Curious Therapist. Today we have with us Ayla Ault. Ayla is an LCSW and MFTC. Ayla specializes in working with late diagnosed and high masking ADHDers and autists, both individually as well as in neurodiverse couples. Ayla is also I want to say this correctly, ADHDer. Did I say that
Yes,
right?
correct. You did.
So Ayla is also an ADHDer and utilizes a combination of somatic and mindfulness modalities with a strong narrative, polyvagal, queer-affirming, and attachment-based lens. She is also EMDR trained and occasionally brings in Reiki, mediumship, and intuitive readings as therapeutic supports. Ayla also has a YouTube channel where they discuss different aspects of their practice and the issues they address, as well as share easy and accessible somatic and mindful exercises for grounding and regulation. Welcome, Ayla. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Jody. I'm so excited to be here.
So why don't we start with you just telling us a little about who you are, what you do, and how you got there?
Yeah, well, how much time do you have? No, I'm just teasing. I'll give you the elevator speech of it. And so you had a wonderful bio there of all the different things. So you're already gathering that I'm a pretty eclectic, curious person. And so I came into the field of mental health kind of late in life. I had a whole other career working in like administration in the federal government, believe it or not. And then, around my Saturn return, kind of my life changed a lot and decided to go into mental health. It was something I always knew was an interest of mine and in the cards, and I just hadn't been ready for it. So I went to grad school and wrapped up when I turned 30, a very interesting age to be doing that. And along the way, a lot of things had happened for me and also helped heal me before I stepped into the clinical realm specifically, because I knew that clinical realm was really, really important and would support kind of these holistic ideas that I had. And so a lot of that was meditation and yoga. I went to Vipassana retreats by Essen Goenka. They helped me substantially understand how to be in my body, helped me understand why body work was such an important, such an important modality for healing for my own nervous system. Language was always really important to me. My bachelor's degree was actually in communication. And I always like to say that that makes a lot of sense, knowing that later on, I'm actually autistic. And so social communication isn't the same for me as it is for other people. And so throughout grad school, I was really interested in learning every way that I could to heal folks and heal myself, right? Because we learn through our body, we learn through our own experience. And so I did a graduate certificate program, 2-year program in relational and systems therapy as my internship. I also did a somatic soul-based trauma training in one of my years as well, right before the pandemic, believe it or not. So that was a fun time to really get to experience what it's like to do both in person as well as virtual. And at that time, I also really started to open up and be out about my spirituality and my interest in spirituality. So I was in a social works like spirituality group in grad school. I got trained in Reiki, both Reiki 1, Reiki 2, and then eventually Reiki 3 master teacher. And so all of those things really combined to fuel like my practice and my understanding of both what my clients were bringing in as well as what I was experiencing. And then of course, like I mentioned, the neurodivergence came along the way. Oh, what's this ADHD? What's this autism? I have clients asking about it, discovered, oh, nope, that's me too. And so as I dove into very typical autistic, like, oh, I don't think I'm autistic, but let me like deep dive research everything I can about it. Oh, I guess that's probably because I'm autistic. And then eventually I figured out, oh yeah, I'm actually ADHD as well. Should have known that one and just didn't. For a couple of years, I started to really see the nervous system differences, right? The differences in how polyvagal theory is so important in understanding how autism and ADHD work, but also how our intuition works. And also seeing so many of my, on my spiritual side, friends and colleagues and mediums, psychic mediums that I'm connected to are ADHD, right? They're also neurodivergent. And so many of us are who have this interest. And so that's really kind of brought me to where I am today. I have a private practice. I also have a Reiki business on the side where I do more of these holistic pieces, and I try to combine the two where appropriate for my licensure. So that's a lot.
It's a lot, but it also makes so much sense. It's kind of like this beautiful prism coming together and creating
Yes.
like this really
Yes.
unique, wonderful design. There's so much that I'm curious around. One of the things that jumped out was when you were talking about how you've come to realize or understand that so many neurodivergent folks are also intuitive or can access information from the other side of the veil, however we want to say it. Their intuition is super high. Can you say
Yep.
more about that and your experience around that and just what you've come to learn, and maybe even if you have any
Yeah.
theories as to why that is?
Oh, I have lots of theories. So I do want to name that they are theories, but they're informed by research as well as like,
Okay,
lived experience.
even better. Yeah.
Typical therapist answer, right? I'm
Yes.
research based, but also,
I love it.
yeah. So what I've noticed, I think part of it is that when you are neurodivergent, and so many of us, right, born before the turn of the century, did not have a lot of other ways to connect with people who also felt different in the world. And so when you grow up neurodivergent, when you have a different neurotype than the neuromajority, you are going to feel inherently different, right? I think one of the most common things I ever saw when I was looking through all the autism in females or autism in women signatures, like lists of like, you might be autistic if was, feels like an alien,
Mhm.
right? Or experiences things differently or processes things differently. And I think that also is so hand in hand with people who have had experiences of paranormal or extrasensory experiences or can make connections between things that other people don't see. And so I always wonder how much is it intuition and how much of it is such a subconscious level of deduction. I love Sherlock Holmes. Wishbone Sherlock Holmes was the best growing up. Still my favorite.
So
And
yeah.
and as I've dove into the research, right, as I've connected with people, there's again so many people. My own mediumship teacher is ADHD. We were talking about Cindy Casa. She's ADHD and she's out about it. Pretty sure Tyler Henry, if you've seen him, is autistic. I
Yes.
think he's mentioned it. I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, that kid is definitely autistic. There's no question. I mask that way. I process that way. I can see myself so much in that. And I think there's a few different reasons. The research shows that folks who are neurodivergent, and I'm speaking specifically to autism and ADHD right now, even though there's a huge umbrella of neurodivergence, right? The neurodivergent umbrella is OCD and CPTSD and PTSD and dyspraxia. I always like to remind folks because I think we use that language a little too interchangeably, and I'm guilty of it 100%. There are differences in how our brains work. One of those is synaptic pruning. And so when you are ADHD, or autistic, your synaptic pruning is different than the typical synaptic pruning. As we develop, right, from babies to adults, we lose about 30 to 50% of our attention, like feel, react neurons, which connect
Mhm.
throughout the brain. you lose those for efficiency, right? As you age, as you go from, baby to toddler to child to adolescent, because you want to make room for more of those prefrontal cortex, future oriented, executive functioning neurons and neuronal connections. We don't have that same pruning. We actually don't have as much pruning. It's funny, I actually went to the eye doctor a few years ago and I did the retinal scan. He's like, this is interesting. Usually folks your age, have much fewer, neurons in there and connections in your retina, but you have quite a bit. You have the amount of someone like half your age. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. I'm autistic, right? Even in other parts of the body, you can see that. And so I think
Wow.
I wonder if there's a connection there because we have more connections in our brain. We have different synaptic channels in a sense in different ways. We didn't lose the same, synapses that, many people do growing up, right? We think about kids are so much more in touch, right, with the other side. They're so much more in touch with spirit. They're so much more in touch with, things that we don't really recognize as adults as much. Well, maybe some of that is they're more connected materially in their brain and not just spiritually, right? And so I wonder, this is a theory time, if that has to do with it, right? We're more connected in ways our brain can pick up and process, not just observe on the subconscious level, but actually process some of the information we're picking up, that extrasensory information, than folks who don't have those connections.
This is so incredibly fascinating. I'm loving this. And there's like a part of me that wants to run out and find all the information I can around this because it makes so much sense. And it also has me thinking about the telepathy tapes and
Yes.
right and the ability for nonverbal folks who aren't as embodied to just easily access these other states of consciousness and these other
Yes.
vibrational places, and it makes sense in terms of the way their brain is structured and what's firing and what's not firing and what's getting in the way and what's not getting in the way. And I just want to go
Absolutely.
back and repeat something that you said in the way in which you said it, because I think it's really important for all of us to think about, especially in the work that we do and especially around trauma. And so, first of
Yes.
all, thank you for reminding us that the neurodivergence umbrella is much bigger than, we tend to think about all the time. And that also includes CPTSD. And I also find that a lot of folks who have CPTSD are also very intuitive and very in touch and tend to have more of these extrasensory
Yeah.
experiences. And so this idea of losing, you said the feel and react connection. I think that's how you said it. Does that sound right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And for people who have experienced trauma as children, they had to hold on to that because that was the only way they could figure out how to be safe in their environment. So that makes total sense. And as you
Absolutely.
mentioned, right, like people who are autistic or ADHD, their brain just doesn't prune those parts. And so it just can, which in the 3D world caused a lot of disruption and challenges as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because the brain it's called the dual mode network or the dual mode theory. And it talks about the brain having two different networks, right? And two different like mental modes. And I think this has to do with mediumship and psychic work, as well as understanding the differences in ADHD and autistic brains versus neurotypical brains. Because we have that default mode network, which is kind of the daydreaming or autopilot mode, right? It's the different waves. I can never remember, this is my ADHD, like which one's alpha and which one's theta, whichever one of those is like in that daydreaming, like we have stronger waves. We have that is a stronger default for us versus that task positive network, which is when we're really focused or we're hyper focused sometimes. We're really active, like we're solving some kind of math problem, that kind of thing. And it is far more natural for neurodivergent, autistic, and ADHDers to be in that first network than it is the second network. And we really
Yeah.
struggle actually to switch that task switching. You've probably heard about that, right?
Yep.
We struggle with that, and sometimes they're combined. And my other thought with this is that combination, right, is what allows if you've ever done mediumship, it very much is like EMDR, right? With EMDR, we have that dual awareness where we want folks to be one foot in the past and one foot in the present, right? So that we can actually do that integration and processing. We're restacking those memories, right, for trauma, because that gets a little mishmashed, right? Because of trauma. Trauma is like this like stuckness. It's this injury that doesn't allow these memory organization, networks to perform correctly, right? And in trauma work, right, like that is so disruptive and that can be so difficult. With neurodivergence, right, with our executive functioning, that can also be very difficult. We're trying to like do the future thing, right? Do the thing that we need to do, but there's like the whole here and now that's getting in the way of it. And so it's kind of like trying to see something through like chicken wire, or screen, and it's not quite there. And then I think with mediumship, right, it's very similar. You're trying to be present and able to communicate what you're hearing, like spirit, for instance, share, or a spirit communicator share. So you're also in like this part of your brain that is using that daydreamy network, right, to be able to see these symbols or feel, information while discussing it, while being able to communicate it without being asleep, right? I think with trance mediumship, there's even a stronger, maybe a different balance or ratio, but you're still doing that balance, that dance. And so I think you can see how all three of these examples link together with the way our brains process, right? And the way our brains process differently. And so much of the body, I heard someone speak on a podcast, and I wish I could remember who it was because I'd like to listen to that episode again. But they were talking about the brain being kind of from the spiritual lens, right, from the woo-woo lens, being a energy capacitor, essentially, or a dampener, right? Because we are in this material plane, but we obviously have access to all this energy and different,
Mm-hmm.
awareness, however you want to describe it. And the brain kind of mediates that. Right. It's a capacitor, it's a transistor. And so depending on how that brain is wired, it's going to have different abilities to mediate and do with that information what it can.
That makes so much sense. And so it makes me think about, as you were talking, where my brain was going was, okay, so how does this then connect with polyvagal theory? And how do you see the nervous system of neurodivergent people responding to traditional therapeutic approaches versus using more holistic or spiritual approaches? That was kind
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I may have to ask you to like repeat that one. I also am noticing like I get very excited about these subjects, and so I'm info dumping a little bit. So feel free to like pause me at any point. This is a
Are
bit
you
meta.
kidding? And I'm like eating it up with a spoon. So
Right? It's fascinating.
it's
Well,
so great.
polyvagal, oh, thank you. Thank you. Polyvagal is really integral, I think, in both understanding how neurodivergence affects folks and kind of that difference between the inner experience and what people see behaviorally, right? Or don't see, as well as therapists, how we treat and how we work with folks who are neurodivergent. Because if you are autistic, ADHD, which is the both of them, it's kind of the community's term for both, you are going to experience the world differently because you're experiencing the world through your nervous system, right? The nervous system forms like bottom up, right? So it's kind of over time as we develop, right? That's how it can get more and more sophisticated. And there is a delay with how neurodivergent folks will develop their nervous system, right? As well as develop their prefrontal cortex. I've seen, again, some of this research is still pretty new, but generally our prefrontal cortex doesn't finally form until about the age of 27. For some studies, they found for like ADHDers, for example, it may completely finally form as late as 35, which, we're
Wow.
hobbits essentially, if you're a
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings fan.
So that's
Yeah,
even later than what I've heard is 24.
right.
But I know
Right.
everyone's unique. And so it's like,
Oh,
okay.
100%. It's always a spectrum. We're talking about averages and what's been measured and what's not been measured. And
Yeah.
yet to like widen that understanding of the spectrum, like, oh, actually the spectrum's this big instead of this big. It means something for all of us, right? It means
Oh,
something for parents who are trying to figure out help their kiddos launch in young adulthood. Like, why is this difficult, right? Or I expected them to be able to work with X, Y, or Z, or not need this kind of help, right? And then the self too, right? Like, oh my gosh, I see my peers or my friends doing this. Why am I struggling, right? Which can lead to that masking, right? Of how can I compensate for this instead?
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah,
the mask, I don't want to interrupt you because this
that's
is
okay.
so much great stuff, but I am curious and I want to make sure we come back to the idea of masking. And you kind of threw it out there when you were talking about Tyler and you were like, oh yeah, I know that masking, that's familiar. And so I'm
Yeah.
really curious about that as well and how that
Mhm.
fits into the way in which you work with people and help them
Yeah,
understand what masking is, how it's impacting them, because
absolutely.
it's soul crushing in so many
Oh
ways,
yeah,
having.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of folks will use camouflaging instead of the word masking, and I think they're very similar. And I always like to name that like everybody masks, right? And I will tie this into polyvagal theory because it absolutely does. But everybody masks. You don't go to like the bank teller. Do people still go to the bank teller? I'm dating myself a little bit.
I don't know.
Yeah, but you don't usually go up to the cashier and, like tell them about your life story. You know what I mean? There's usually a certain kind of like, "Oh, hello, how are you?" "Yes, I'm doing well." And then, there's like a social dance there that we pick up on at some point, right? So we all mask to some degree. We're not going to be the same way in front of our partners as we are in front of our clients, right? And vice versa. And so I always like to just name like masking is not inherently a bad thing or a negative thing. I think the word masking has been used to say, like, oh, you're two faced, right? Or you're not even being who you are. And I think there can be that experience for some, especially autistics, to an extent of they're trying so hard to fit in. They're trying so hard to not appear different from their peers, to get in trouble for whatever it is that their nervous system, their neurotype wants them to be able to do. For instance, stimming, fidgeting, struggling with loud noises, right? I have misophonia with people eating. It is not a fun thing. And sometimes I will be sitting with my family and just trying not to cringe and react, even though it's truly causing me pain. Like that is what misophonia is. It's a pain reaction, different things like that. And so sometimes we mask because we want to be able to do things, but our nervous system is not having a good time.
Yes.
Right. And so when we think about the impact of that masking, right, when we think about the impact of, well, here my nervous system is going into activation mode, right? Like I want to get the heck out of here, or I want to, like, not that I ever would, but I want to slap that fork because it is just so squeaky on that plate right now. Instead of doing that, we're kind of repressing it, right? It's sort of similar to, I know you're a therapist, Jody. I know you have a lot of therapists who are listening. So when we think about attachment theory, right? And the kiddos who have like the elevated heart rate, even though there's no affect, right? Even though, right, they're going into that more avoidant attachment behavior, there is still a physiological response. I would say that's very similar to what masking can be like. There's still a physiological response. We're just not necessarily outwardly allowing that, right? Or expressing that. And that can be exhausting, right? Not only is, the nervous system in an ADHD or an autistic or an ADHD person already more sensitive, right? Just inherently more sensitive and inherently more rigid, right? Unable to like regulate itself. The vagal brake is, this is just an aside, this is a personal thing. The vagal brake always throws me, and I always want to describe it as a gear. Like it's a gear shift, right? It's not really a brake. It's one of those, standard gear shifts in our cars, right? And it can get really gunky sometimes. And it can be really difficult, right? If you don't do a lot of gear shifting, it can be really difficult to go from one gear to the other, right? And that's what the vagal brake does, is it helps us shift gears. So when we are appropriately out of something that needs extra energy, fight or flight, we can calm ourselves down and feel safe and repair and rest and kind of, rejuvenate ourselves and refuel ourselves. That doesn't happen very well for folks who are ADHD and autistic. Naturally going to struggle with being in a calm state, right? Again, I can't remember if that's the theta or the alpha waves. I think that might be the alpha waves, In the brain, we just don't sit there very often. That's not easy for us, right? And again, when you think about the sensory sensitivities, our environments are not made for folks with sensory sensitivities, especially in modern days. We have bright lights and fluorescence and beeping and vibrations and just all of the things, right? And so all of that is basically keeping the nervous system on 24/7, right? And so masking and polyvagal theory can really combine here because there's essentially trauma from our environments in a sensory capacity. And I'm not even speaking to like the social piece, right? So let's say you're trying to mask, you're trying to really, really pay attention and listen, even though for you, as an autistic person processing multiple conversations in a group, you're going to fall behind and it's really exhausting, right? It's just so exhausting to try to keep track of everything, but you want to be a part of it. And so here you are, you're going to interject, you want to tell a story because, oh, I had something to say about that, but it's way too late, right? Because you're using your prefrontal cortex to figure that out, not intuitively figure that out. And so not only are you exhausted trying to keep up, you're also getting this look, right? Or people are like, yeah, okay. And they start to step away. And so your nervous system is also feeling that rejection, right? And so that's a little micro trauma too, right? And so you can see how over a lifetime or half a lifetime, all of those can accumulate and really build up, make a difference.
Hugely. I mean, it's so complicated, and I love the way you described it because I mean, especially if you know polyvagal theory, it all makes so much sense.
So much sense.
I'm wondering if maybe we can back up just a second because I'm realizing as I say that out loud that not everybody listening knows polyvagal theory. So can you do like a quick elevator speech around that so
Mhm.
that as we continue the conversation, people will know what we're talking about in terms of the different nervous system states and neuroception and co-regulation and all the kind
Yeah.
of key words that I'm sure are really important in working with this population.
Absolutely. And I know you have done a lot of work with polyvagal too, Jody. So please feel free to like jump in because the more people can explain things in different ways, the more people can understand them, right? Because we all use different words.
So true. And I just want to say, I love your metaphor of the gear shift opposed to the brake because my brain could never quite understand the brake. I'm like, is it brake or is it the gas or is it like, what is actually happening here? So the gear shift
Right.
makes so much more sense to me. So
I know.
thank
I'm
you
just,
for
my
that.
only fear is like with, the younger generations,
Don't
like
know
it's
what
all
that
automatic.
is.
Yeah, but so polyvagal theory is it's Stephen Porges, right? And I would say Deb Dana because Deb Dana helped so much with Stephen
Agreed.
Porges. So we don't want to just, we want to give credit where it's actually due. They came up with this theory that talks about the vagus nerve, which is it's two branches basically.
Yes.
We have the old version, right? That we kind of the oldest mammals in our evolution have. It's what keeps everything running, right? It keeps our organs going, it keeps our hearts beating, all of that. And then we have a more developed vagus nerves branch, which is really about like the social engagement system. It's very much, and it's polyvagal, the vagus nerve. Vagus means like many branches, right? And so that's how it's connected to all these different organ tissues and other pieces, other nerve pieces. We have a vagus nerve going through our face, through our chest, our muscles. And it's the vagus nerve is another cranial nerve, right? So it comes from our brainstem. We have about seven like very major cranial nerves. One goes, they come down through your neck. One is directly tied to your trapezius muscles, by the way. And that's why we have chronic stress in our shoulders. And
Yes.
I'm
And
always struggling with that,
all
right?
those exercises with stretching out that muscle really helps shift your nervous system. Who knew?
Who knew, right? As well as breathing exercises, because one of the part of the branch goes into your diaphragm, right?
Yes.
And so that's a way of accessing it. And it also has to do with your fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, right? And so it's trying to keep you safe. And it's trying to keep you safe, not just from your environment, but also through social interaction because we have those mirror neurons, because we co regulate, right? It's all about regulation in our nervous system. And so I always like to remind folks that regulation isn't just, oh, I'm feeling really calm and relaxed. Regulation is that your nervous system is responding appropriately to whatever is happening,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
So if you're sitting down to eat a meal, right, you want to be in a dorsal vagal, rest and digest mode, right? You want to be in this place where, oh, okay, yeah, I don't need to get up and run. My heart rate can slow down. I need to put some more energy and blood into my digestion system. I don't need my heart to go like boom, 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 boom. That's going to make it really, really hard to eat. And a lot of that has to do with both proprioception, right? Feeling safe in our bodies and space. I always love to do a lot of like ankle rolls and wrist rolls because that's a way of checking into your proprioception, as well as interoception is what am I noticing in my body? Am I hungry right now? Is my heart beating? What's the temperature like? Can I access that? And neuroception as well as like what are my emotions, right? What am I thinking? How that influences how our body state is. I'm trying to use it in like a less clinical term because I can get really into the weeds on that. And all of those senses, right, are affected with neurodivergence, right? Every single one of those. And so you've probably heard of alexithymia. Alexithymia is where we can't really feel our bodies or our emotional states as much. So it's really, I don't always feel hungry, but I will know if I start getting really sweaty that I need to eat. And I have a pretty strong mind body connection, but there are different ways that it's affected, right? And again, proprioception is, you've probably heard ADHDers are very notorious about hitting their hips on counters and tables, right? So where is my body in space? Dyspraxia can affect that as well. And the neuroception, right? Like you talked about that, Jody. I think that's really important too, of like noticing that I would call it that's the mind body connection, really, right? How am I noticing these things? How is my thought pattern affecting this, right? How is my emotion affected by the thoughts I'm creating? So anything I forgot to add, Jody, because I do want to bring in your expertise.
No, I think you did a fabulous job. I think one of the important things, in addition to everything that you've already said, that is good for us to know and understand about polyvagal theory and understanding these nervous system states is that we are designed to move through these states all day long. And no state is inherently bad or good. They just are. They're there to
Just
help,
are.
yeah, survive and
Mhm.
and even thrive in our environment. However, many of us get stuck in some of the more defended states.
Yes.
And that's where we start to see a lot of chronic problems, not only emotional, mental health challenges such as depression and anxiety, but also a lot of health issues such as inflammation, heart issues with the heart rate, diabetes, things like that. There's a whole other
Yes.
conversation going back to the ACEs study, the adverse childhood
Yes.
experiences, and that's like a 3 hour long conversation. But it's
Kind of.
all it's yeah, I know. It's like yeah, there's too much.
It's all
It,
connected.
it's all connected. It's all very much connected. And folks who are neurodivergent, like the whole umbrella, experience
Yes.
these things much more acutely, is what I think you're
Yes.
saying,
Absolutely.
than folks who are more on, let's say, the bell curve, like the median of what we would consider to be neurotypical.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love how you talk about that flexibility because I was using the word rigid, right? Whenever the nervous system is rigid, it's not, it's flexible, right? It's a lot
Yes.
harder to change states. It's a lot harder to shift that gear. And there is that inherent sensitivity, right? And let's say, you're experiencing something very, very strongly, intensely is the word I'm looking for, right? When you're a kid, well, that's going to affect your nervous system, right? Maybe that's trauma, right? Maybe that's an attachment wound, right? And that's going to continue over time because your body isn't going to naturally heal that as quickly when you are neurodivergent.
Mm. Hmm.
So there's a lot there. I know there's like, oh, there's so many things, but that's why there's so much comorbidity with autism, ADHD, and other neurodivergences with autoimmune diseases, right? You were mentioning,
Yes.
inflammation with chronic pain. I'm thinking about fibromyalgia can develop a lot, right? All of these IBS, all of these different things. I have celiac, very, very common. Part of that is a hypermobility that's associated with autism and ADHD, right? And it's a polygenetic, right, type of condition. It's not a disorder, right? Disorders are things you heal. You don't heal the way you're wired, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with the way you're wired, right?
Great. Thank you for saying that because I think that's really important, and we want to make sure people walk away from this conversation with if with nothing else than that, right? It's not about
Yes.
healing, it's about let me know how this lands on you. It's about understanding, awareness,
Yep.
working with,
Working with, not against your body,
not again.
right?
Yes.
Exactly. Ableism says, oh, the way you're wired is wrong. You should fix it. And inclusivity, neuroinclusivity, and diversity theory says, no, like there's nothing wrong with the way you are wired. But let's find some accommodations for you until our social environment can better support you.
Yeah. It's making me think of something that I was reading the other day that was talking about helping people who are neurodivergent with organizing their space. And
Yeah.
this idea of not working against their nervous system. And
Yes.
I was like, oh my God, I love this because it's like if you always put your keys here, why would you put a hook over there? It's like
Right?
that kind of a thing. Like, why are we forcing
Yeah.
these like round pegs into square holes when we can just make a round hole?
Exactly, exactly. But we are conditioned by society. What is, oh, but this is what you should do, right? Shoulds are very strong motivators, shoulds are
Yeah,
shaming. And so, like, oh, well, I want to fit in. I want to be normal. I don't want to be singled out for being different, right? Because that's that rejection sensitivity. And so all of, yeah. So it is a lot of like, maybe it seems really simple, but we just don't think about it. Like, oh, I could just make it easy on myself. Like,
exactly.
there's no harm in that. That's actually great.
Well, and so like I'm trying to figure out with my son who just never hangs anything up. Why do I still have hangers in his closet? Is there a better way? And given that
Yes.
he's got piled, I'm thinking, maybe some like bins that he can just throw his stuff in.
Yes. Oh my gosh, bins are the best, especially like a Clarity bin. My partner's daughter calls it her Clarity bin. It's like the clean but dirty, like I could wear it again, but that's how it doesn't end up on the
Oh, yes.
floor. Yeah, no,
I
it's a good
have a
idea.
clarity pile. I totally have a
Yes.
I I love that word. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. So do it. But yeah, I love that. I love that.
So how do you then support clients in distinguishing between their intuition and masking or survival responses?
I love that question, Jody. I love that question. And it's interesting because I think when I talk to therapists about supporting neurodivergent folks, right, a lot of it is me reminding therapists that you already know how, right? A lot of it is reframing away from, oh, this is a bad behavior into, oh, yep, this is just a barrier or this is something I need to work with instead of against. Right. And so when I think about discernment, which is kind of what you're speaking to, right? Intuition and masking, right? A lot of it is how do I learn to be grounded in my nervous system first and foremost? I don't care if you're coming at this from a clinical perspective or if you are going into a psychic school or attending, a development circle. Everything starts with getting grounded first, right? We
Yes.
have to be grounded. We have to support our nervous systems and going into that ventral vagal, that middle state, right? We have dorsal vagal, that's the rest and digest I mentioned earlier. Then we have that sympathetic, that activated place, right? Which can be fight or flight. It can also be, ooh, I'm really excited. I'm not too far into that spectrum. That happy, social, engaged ventral vagal middle, that's where the magic happens. That's where we can do the most. It's where we can be the most grounded, but also active and focused. And so, whatever work we are doing, whether it's healing work or intuitive work, we have to learn how to regulate our nervous systems. We have to learn what are the things that can put us into that happy middle, that window of tolerance. What are the things that are glimmers? You've heard a lot of probably somatic experiencing or somatic practitioners use the word glimmers instead of triggers, kind of like an opposite. Oh, this is really disruptive. This is really soothing, right? So, what's going to
Yes.
be soothing our nervous system? What's going to be grounding it? Because when we're in that grounded state, excuse me, when we are in that place of, oh, I feel really calm and centered, that's where we can tap into that sense of knowing, Right. And I talk about that inner knowing, that subtle gut awareness, whether I have very left-brained folks or very right-brained folks, right? Because I think all humans can relate to that, right? When we're masking as neurodivergent folks, we are not in our knowing state most of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're either not focused on it or we're not connected to it, depending on how heavily we are masking and how long we have been masking, right? And so one of the pieces, just like if we were doing some vagus nerve, some good old Deb Dana reference work here, we would be trying to figure out, okay, so what do you notice when you are in this state, right? What do you notice when you are in this state? What does it either feel like in your body, or what thoughts do you have if you have alexithymia that you can notice that are cueing you that you're in a masking place? Because so much of it is just under our radar for most of us. Like I still don't always know what I'm masking. I just get excited because it's such an ingrained conditioned piece versus like when you're really relaxed, when you are just feeling totally yourself, right? Or most, comfortable. What do you notice? What are the cues? And so working on developing some really conscious awareness of those cues and conscious awareness of those nervous system states is how we can start to recognize, okay, is this intuition or is this anxiety? I actually had a client yesterday and we were talking about this. This is an ADHD client and was experiencing a lot of anxiety and health anxiety. And we were having a discussion about, yeah, okay, so your limbic system really takes over because that's its job. Its job is survival. And I know you were like, oh my gosh, like I knew this in the past. So how could I know that then? And then all of these other thoughts not be true, right? And we were talking about some health anxiety stuff. And, it was such a great question because as autistics, we're always trying to figure out the rules, right? Everybody has this rule book that we don't know. And so we're trying to like very consciously of like, okay, what's this? What's this? What's this? But we can fall into this all or nothing in black and white thinking really easily. Again, that's associated with that rigid nervous system. And so what we took some time to talk about was the difference between, okay, when you knew, what did that feel like? That was quiet. That was subtle. That didn't like spark your nervous system at all. Actually, you said it was so casual and it was this big deal, right? But you just knew. You just knew. What you're talking about now, client, is the sense of anxiety and is a younger client. So crashing out, I believe, is the term. And the sense of like, it's taking over and I just want to really feed into this. I'm like, well, that's not knowing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knowing is quiet, and that is not a quiet feeling. Now, quiet knowing can still be loud, right? Like can still be magnetic is maybe another way of saying it. Can still pull us, but it's more centered, I would say, in the body for those of us who can kind of somatically resonate with different sensations. Whereas in my experience, and a lot of what I've observed for clients is that anxiety is more external, like more surface, right?
Yeah.
More in this kind of like outer aura, area, buzzy, right? It's probably a different frequency. I just don't know how to measure all of it.
It probably is a different frequency. Okay, so what I think I'm hearing you say is that, and it all makes sense. So when we're talking about intuition and inner knowing and our true self,
Mhm.
that's coming from a very grounded, regulated place. And it doesn't have this anxious energy attached to it. Even if it's something scary or something challenging, the process of knowing isn't going to feel overwhelming and dysregulating.
Right.
When we get into that space of like, oh my God, I just know something's wrong, I just know something's wrong, that's something different.
That's something. And it can cause anxiety, right? I've experienced that. I'm very empathic and I'm very easily attuned to people, whether they're in my immediate space or not. And there's definitely been times where I'm like, I'm noticing anxiety, but it doesn't feel like it's mine. And then I'll say, hey, is everything okay? And somebody like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm actually having a panic attack. Thank you so much for texting. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that explains that. Right. But it wasn't the kind of anxiety where it was overwhelming me or taking over. It felt different, right? Or distant, or again, not in that the anxiety wasn't a central knowing, right? The anxiety was a flavor.
Yeah, so yeah, I love that, the idea of it being a flavor. And also arriving for me is this sense of being able to access it from your observing
Yes,
self,
the wise mind,
wise
self,
mind.
right? The
Mhm.
true self, depending on which modality you
Whatever we
want to
want to
speak
call
from.
it, self energy, Buddha mind, it's all, yeah,
Yes.
it's
Yep.
all that.
Highest self, all of
Yeah.
it. All of it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's a really important distinction and discernment, right? Like to teach folks, I think,
Yes.
because it's really difficult, especially I imagine people who are neurodiverse, because things can feel so overwhelming, that little spark can become a huge wildfire pretty quickly. And once you're in the wildfire, it's really hard to get out.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to just let it kind of die down, right? And thinking about
Yeah.
meltdowns, right? We kind of have to let them run their course,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. So it is one of those things where it takes a while, right? It's not like an overnight of, okay, I've solved it, right? It's a lifelong piece,
Mhm.
right? Especially for those of us who have those differences in kind of either observing our emotions, being able to attach sensations to emotions and kind of understanding what we are feeling at any given time, right? It can be a slower process, but it's a very
Yeah.
worthwhile process.
So to that point, coming back to one of the questions I asked earlier, because I don't think we got to it, but let me know if somehow I missed it. How then do, let's say, holistic and more spiritual approaches support neurodivergent folks differently
Yeah.
than, let's say, more traditional top-down approaches? Like, why would one lean into using a more holistic bottom-up approach?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons is maybe we've talked about it, but we haven't actually named it directly. And that is the body focus, the nervous system focus, and focusing on that first versus kind of that top-down cognitive
Yeah.
piece, right? Because the nervous system is really where the magic is happening. It's the root, right, of it all. The nervous system is where we can start to really affect change on a deeper level, right? It's the dandelion root, so to speak, although dandelions are good. They're tasty. And so I think with holistic, there's a lot of different things to holistic. I'm speaking first to like the body work, the nervous system work, the EMDR, the somatic experiencing, the safe and sound protocols, right? I'm speaking more to that nervous system first because I think that is key. I also want to bring in these other aspects too, right? So for example, when I hear holistic, and I always like to ask practitioners, like, what do you mean by holistic? Because people mean different things, right? Are we talking about
Or
energy
really
work,
important.
sound
Yeah.
healing, yoga? Are we talking about breath work? Like, what do we mean by that? Herbs, herbalism, all of that stuff. And so when I work, I do like say, oh, let's incorporate whatever works, right? Whatever is going to be responsive. Part of our nervous system differences is that we are interest based. And so, first and foremost, let's go with what's interesting. Like your nervous system is going to respond with what feels good and what feels interesting, what's novel, what is unique, like what are we drawn to. The other piece is a lot of us are more intuitively inclined, or, I always say with EMDR, sometimes I have to go in sideways. I have to kind of get at stuff at an angle instead of kind of directly, right? Anything direct can be a little overwhelming for the nervous system. And so sometimes using intuition, sometimes using astrology as a framework to talk and label things, because words are really, really helpful, and finding the right words can be so resonant. Sometimes it's Reiki, right? I always think of Reiki as kind of like the carrier oil of so many different
Mhm.
modalities and so many different tools. It really is like, okay, yes, we want to use some peppermint, but that can be a little spicy. So let's infuse it with some Reiki, because that can really soothe the nervous system. That can actually be really, really helpful. And I haven't used this term yet, but you'll hear this a lot when it's with nervous systems that are neurodiverse, which is that we're very gestalt and how we learn. We do tend to be feelers. We do tend to be somatically inclined, or somatic processors first and foremost, right? Maybe we've learned to intellectualize, and it's not everybody, right? Again, it's a full spectrum. The spectrum is a sphere. It's not a straight line, right? And so everybody is going to be different, but so often there will be a degree of gestalt learning and gestalt absorption. And so utilizing that, right? Responding to that with intuition, with using different words with Reiki energy healing, with somatic experiencing, tapping, with sound and breathing, if that's tolerated, can be such easeful, right? Gentle and therefore, right, effective ways of healing. I always say we still have to work with the cognitive stuff, right? Because it's still there. It's still going to affect us. We're not one or the other. But I think that can actually give us a more complete and accessible way of helping folks heal and helping us heal than just kind of the traditional talk therapy.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that some of these more holistic, and I love your question about like, well, what do you mean by that? And for me, it really is this idea of supporting mind, body, and spirit
Yes,
together, right? So some of these approaches that really do kind of bring in the combination of all of those things, support the nervous system so that the cognitive processing and the more brain-based healing can
yes.
actually occur.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kind of like you were saying with it can be a wildfire. If we can help the nervous system slow down a little bit, add that little pause, right? Man, that can really shift our relationship to our thoughts. That can
Right.
really shift our relationship to that perseveration, that loop that keeps us in that fight or flight mode, right? That really is like a negative feedback loop.
Yeah, I love that. So I just looked at the clock and I'm aware I know we have to end and I feel like there's so much more to talk about. So maybe we'll come back and do like a part two. If people want to learn more about you and the work that you do, where should they look?
Yes, yes. So I'm so sorry. Again, I could talk for hours. I love
It's
all of
not
these
you.
these subjects.
Yeah.
There's just not enough time in the day or energy in the Ayla, as I like to say. I've said that forever. So I have both a Reiki business and I have my private practice business. And so I do like to name because those two things that do have to be separated. My private practice is Ault Holistic Therapy. So Ault, like my last name, Ault. And I have an Instagram that I'm not really on because, Instagram. I do have a YouTube channel started. Very busy, a little bit burned out because I'm neurodivergent, so I'm not posting all the time, but there are some really great exercises and information on there. And I also have a newsletter that folks can sign up for and I'm only licensed in Colorado, so I like to name that because, if that matters to you, right, if you're searching for that. I also have my Reiki practice, and that's Old Oak Healing. And I am on Instagram and I do readings as well as Reiki. I'm predominantly long distance. With Reiki, you can kind of do that from wherever, right? You can do distant healing. But that's where I have all of those offerings. Occasionally, I will teach some Reiki classes as well. I don't have any right now, but they're going to be coming up here soon. So
Fabulous. And I will put all of that in the show notes.
awesome. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for spending this time and sharing your knowledge and all that you are doing. Amazing, amazing work.
Awesome, Jody. Thank you so much. It's so fun to talk about this stuff with you. So thank you so much for inviting me. Take
Of
care.
course. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining me on The Spiritually Curious Therapist. I hope today's episode offered insight, inspiration, or a deeper connection to your own healing path. If this show resonates with you, be sure to follow the show, leave a review, and share it with a friend or colleague who's on this healing path too. If you're feeling called to explore this work more deeply, you can find resources, courses, and ways to work with me, including nervous system healing programs and psychotherapeutic Reiki trainings over at therachihealing.com and journeywithkindredsouls.com. And if you're on Instagram, come say hi at Holistic Heart Healing. I love connecting with fellow healers and seekers like you. As always, while I'm a licensed therapist, this podcast is for educational and inspirational purposes only and not a substitute for therapy. Take good care of your heart and nervous system. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and stay connected to the wisdom within your heart.